So, this is a response to Lacey's video on anti-capitalism is opposed to veganism. In her video, she talked about some of the alternatives to capitalism. One of them was communism, and she explained in detail how communism harms people. So, for example, when the communist dictatorship has tried to gain power, they've done that through killing people and harming people in some way. In communist societies, there is slavery quite often, and how that is kind of opposed to veganism in a way. Now, I feel like, in general, communist veganism has a lot of assumptions. Now, I'm going to go over the assumptions that it has. The first assumption that it has is that human rights and animal rights are the same thing. So that veganism is about human rights in some way. The second assumption that anti-communist vegans have is that their political ideology will essentially further human rights. So that's the second thing. And the third thing is, the third thing I wanted to do was, in order to kind of improve Swayze's video, is talk about some of the cruelty that animals experience in communist systems. Because there's an assumption, and I have spoke to communist vegans before, and there's this assumption there that if you get rid of profit, basically, you won't have animal exploitation, and I just wanted to kind of disprove that myth.
So, veganism is a philosophy and way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as practicable and possible, all forms of exploitation of and cruelty to animals for food, clothing, and any other purpose, and by extension promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of humans, the environment and animals. In dietary terms, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals.
So the definition of veganism doesn't say anything about human rights. It doesn't say that you have to be into human rights to be vegan. All it talks about is animal rights and not consuming animal products. And that's it. There isn't a human rights angle to veganism. It's not included in the definition, and it's really not part of veganism. I'm not saying that these issues aren't important, but I feel like if veganism was about human rights, we'd have much more pressing issues to worry about than whether someone's capitalist or communist or liberal or conservative. What about child sweatshops? For example, the Vegan Society definition doesn't say that vegans have to avoid, sweatshop labour or fast fashion. It doesn't say that vegans have to buy fair trade food or avoid food that uses child slavery. All of these issues are big issues that both conservatives and people on the left are concerned about. But the Vegan Society doesn't say that in their definition. And also, they label products as vegan, particularly in the case of cosmetics, which actually do use child labour or do use bad working conditions for people. And so I just feel like if veganism was about human rights, it was a human rights movement as well as an animal rights movement, why doesn't the Vegan Society state that in the definition? And why does the Vegan Society label products as vegan, which are, use child slavery or use bad working conditions for people? It wouldn't make much sense. The second thing that kind of makes me think about this issue, so how human rights and animal rights are very different, is if human rights and animal rights were the same thing, and you had to, to be vegan, you had to stand up for both human rights and animal rights, what about animal rights extremists? What about people who blow up animal testing laboratories, for example? Are those people now not vegan because they're blowing up an animal testing laboratory and they could put people in harm's way? There could be a security guard working late in the animal testing laboratory and he could get blown up. There could be someone walking down the street who could be harmed or killed by the bomb going off. Are those people no longer vegan because they're potentially putting people in harm's way in order to further the animal rights message? And if veganism was about human rights, those people wouldn't be vegan because they are putting humans in harm's way to further the animal rights message. So it doesn't make much sense, because there are a lot of contexts when we have things that people do which are, which they consider to be furthering the animal rights message, or they're doing because they're vegan, but that are detrimental to human rights or human health in general. Okay, so even if we assume that veganism has something to do with human rights, which I don't believe that in any context or in any way at all, I think that this anti-capitalist veganism is more a deep-rooted issue of far-left veganism in general. Now, far-left vegans assume that in order to be pro-human rights, you have to be pro-choice, you have to be pro-BLM, you have to be anti-capitalist, you have to be all of these political, things that they are, but you might not be. And that's it. And it's just kind of ridiculous. It's equivalent to me saying that I'm against mass immigration. I'm against mass immigration because you end up with communities of people that are just one race, and in these communities of people that are just one race, like you have like in certain areas of Birmingham or London, you have communities which are entirely made up of people from Pakistan. Now in these areas you have very, very high unemployment. You have a lot of these people don't learn English, and because of the high unemployment and because of the lack of English skills, you often have high crime rates in these areas. Mass immigration also affects British people, because if a company immigrates people from abroad, like immigrates people from Poland in order to be factory workers, it lowers the average hourly rate that factory workers will get, because the jobs are more competitive, and this affects British people because they have a lower, hourly rate of pay than they would normally without mass immigration. And so it would be equivalent to me saying that and saying, oh well, because I believe that mass immigration is bad, you have to believe that mass immigration is bad, otherwise you hate humans, and otherwise you're not really vegan. I think that's kind of ridiculous for me to say that, and that's the same thing that people, who support the BLM will do. They'll basically say, well, I support the BLM because they want to have, they want to defund the police and have community volunteers in black areas, and I think that this would be a very good idea. That if you don't believe in this, then you're not really vegan. It's just kind of ridiculous, because it assumes that everyone has the same political beliefs. Everyone feels like human rights will be increased in the same way. So I believe that human rights would be better, or it would be better for humans if we didn't have mass immigration. Obviously, people who support the BLM feel like it would be better for humans if everyone supported the BLM. But not everyone's the same, and not everyone feels that human rights will be increased in the same way, or that humans will, that human harm will be decreased in the same way. And so yeah, I just find left-wing veganism very weird because it kind of, or far left veganism very weird because it kind of assumes that everyone, that human rights is increased, that everyone thinks human rights is increased in the same way, or human harm is decreased in the same way, which they clearly don't. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is, communism in practice and how it harms animals. So this I'm going to be talking about under the context of communist China because I've been there twice. And I know how bad the animal welfare standards are. Secondly, I'm going to talk about just some of the kind of fundamental ideas that vegan communists have, and how I don't think it would work in practice, how I don't think, a communist society would necessarily lead to veganism in practice. So in terms of China, I have been there quite a lot and it's very kind of sad in general. They don't actually have any legal laws for animals at all. You're allowed to, there's so many things that I saw in China. There was a guy who, he had a tank on the back of his motorbike and he was driving around with his tank on the back of his motorbike, and then he would, with full of fish, and he would stop and then literally just cut the fish's head off, and dismantle it in front of people. There was a chicken that was in China that was hanging outside a restaurant with a rope, piece of rope tied around its foot, waiting to be killed. There were turtles that they had, which people had, that I saw quite a lot. And these turtles had their shell, which was painted, and they were in like a small little, like a tub, basically, like it's probably as big as the turtle was, and they were selling them to little kids. The laws in China concerning animals and animal rights are horrific, and they are a communist society. Only very recently were businesses actually allowed to be privately run or privately owned in China, and that was a kind of a revolutionary thing for the Chinese government to do. And so this kind of assumption that somehow you'll get to a communist society, or that a communist society will lead to better animal protections, is kind of completely misguided. So one of the ideas that I have had expressed by a communist vegan was the fact that if you have a communist system, you have no profit, basically. And as there's no profit, there'll be no animal exploitation. But this doesn't really work logically. In practice, there are communes which have factory farms, and they have factory farms because it's a way of using their space effectively. That's the first thing. And it's a way of producing a large amount of meat, basically, for their community, and and supplying the amount of meat that the community want to eat. If we had a system where you could go into the shop and you could pick up whatever food you wanted for free, let's say, then I don't know how that would make people vegan. So people buy products, buy meat for taste, tradition and pleasure. Now, you're not in any way, by changing the price of the meat, you're not in any way changing the fact that people like the taste of meat. You're not changing the fact that people get pleasure from eating meat. You're not changing the traditions that people have around meat in any way, shape or form. And people buy products in general because of access, accessibility and availability. Availability, accessibility, and price. So if you change the price of the meat products, I don't know that would actually help people buy less meat. In fact, when you have more wealth generation, people either go vegan or they buy more meat, and in general you have an increase in meat consumption even in Western countries as we have more and more and more and more wealth generation. And so if we have free food to everyone, then essentially people will be able to buy more meat if they want to, and they probably will, because meat tends to be very expensive, and one of the limiting factors that limit people from buying it is its price. Secondly, accessibility and availability of meat wouldn't change. It would still be it would still be as accessible, so it would still be in the same shops, and it would still be as available as it is now. And so I don't know why they think that moving into a communist society would somehow make people vegan. It seems a very odd idea, and I don't think, and it hasn't worked in practice anyway, when you have, small communities all over the place that eat meat. Anyway, thank you for watching, guys. Please subscribe and like this video, and yeah, comment down below if you like it.